He's a teacher with a passion. He's an historian with a PhD. From Lords to London, from New York to Athens, he's professing the truth that sets you free. You're at the Bar of History with Dr. Ed Mazza.
Hello and welcome, everybody. You are at the Bar of History with Dr. Ed. I am your barista. And this is the show where we go back in time in order to save the future. You know, it's been said that those who fail to study the past will be doomed to repeat the same mistakes. And so today, folks, I want to share with you a period in Catholic Church history that you might not be familiar with. And this is the period from the late 14th century into the early 15th century. And I got to tell you, this was a rough period for the Catholic Church. It starts out with the popes not actually living in Rome for decades. Now, let's get this straight, especially for our non-Catholic audience. A pope is so called because he is the papa or the bishop of the city of Rome, in addition to being the vicar of Christ on earth. But from the early 1300s until 1378, the popes did not reside in Rome itself. You see, we call this in church history the Babylonian captivity. Actually, don't want to confuse you guys. In Bible history, there is a period of Israel's history known as the Babylonian captivity. And that's when, for over 70 years, the Jews were in slavery to the Chaldeans, to the Neo-Babylonians in modern-day Iraq. And they wept by the waters of Babylon. And it wasn't until the Persian Empire was started by King Cyrus that the Jews were allowed to return to Jerusalem. Well, something similar happened when there was a controversy between the King of France and the Pope of Rome. And what happened is that for, again, 72 years, from 1305 to 1377, the popes resided in Avignon in France. Now, this was a terrible scandal, but to add to that, people chose sides in terms of the 100 Years' War that was going on between France and England. And the fact that the popes were residing in what is today France made it look like the Pope was taking sides with the French king over the English. Now, this was disturbing for everyone. And God raised up a very famous saint. I'm sure you've heard of her, Saint Catherine of Siena. Saint Catherine was a mystic. A mystic is someone who has a deep, deep, loving union with the Holy Trinity. She fasted, she prayed, she did tremendous penances, and she was a vessel for God's grace. Now, being a woman in any century has never been easy, but to be a woman at a time when, how shall we say this, powerful men were not behaving well, it was Catherine's role to write to the popes and tell them, you have to get back to Rome. In fact, Catherine of Siena, even though she was just a simple lay woman, not even a nun, she traveled to Avignon and she met with Pope Gregory XI, and she reminded him in no uncertain terms that he needed to man up and get back to Rome. You see, the popes were afraid of the rival factions that controlled the city of Rome. You might think of them as modern-day mafia families. There was the Colonna family, and then there was the Orsini family. and the two of them were at each other's throats. And so Gregory was hesitant to go back, but thanks to the urging of St. Catherine of Siena, and thanks to the grace of God, in 1376, he returned the papacy to Rome, and unfortunately, he died a few months later. Now, as you know, when a pope dies, the cardinals get together in a conclave, literally with the key, conclave, and they're basically locked. They're locked in a room, and they can't get out until they elect a new successor to St. Peter. Well, since the popes had just gotten back to Rome after over 70 years of exile, the Italian people, the people of Rome, were very vocal and vociferous that the next pope should be an Italian. And they apparently banged on the doors. They were yelling and screaming and chanting outside. And so the cardinals, even though many of them were French, did in fact select an Italian. And he was elected as Pope Urban VI. Now, Urban VI might have been an Italian, but he was an uppity Italian. He was an Italian who did not mince words. And unfortunately, he took a, how shall we say, he took a hammer to swat flies, you might say. He was crude. He could be very biting in his insults. And he intended to reform the church. Now, reforming the church is a good thing, but he basically frightened his fellow cardinals. And they said, gee, what did we just do? Who did we just elect? And so the first opportunity that they had when they got away from Rome, they held another conclave in which they elected a new pope. They said, you know what? We need to do a do-over. Remember when you were a kid and you were playing games with your friends? You're like, no. We're going to have a do-over. Well, that's what these French cardinals did. And they elected a so-called French pope, Clement VII. But of course, what they did was to create an antipope. So today's lesson is going to be about the can of worms that was opened up within the Catholic Church. We're going to talk about antipopes, and we're going to talk about apostate Catholics who paved the way for the Protestant Reformation. We're going to talk about people like John Wycliffe, John Huss, and others. So let's continue with the story of Antipope Clement VII versus Pope Gregory XI. Neither of these men were retiring and shy violets. They refused to give in to one another. And so for decades, this schism continued. And even after Gregory XI died, and even after Clement VII died, they continued to be succeeded by successors who also refused to negotiate. I think there were some negotiations, but ultimately they failed to solve the problem. Well, how can you have a Catholic Church without a clear head of the church? I mean, literally, different nations took sides over this. The French and their allies, who, as I said before, were at war with England, they chose, of course, the French Pope for their allegiance. And so France and the kingdom of in Spain, the kingdom of Castile, also other certain regions chose the French antipope. England, the Holy Roman Empire, and other places chose the real pope, which we know from history to be the real pope, the Roman pope. So, and there were saints on different sides of this issue, not just nation states, but saints. St. Catherine of Siena said from the very beginning that Pope Gregory the Pope Urban VI was the rightful pope. And there is no such thing as a do-over. And whereas in Spain, in the Kingdom of Aragon, it was Saint Vincent Ferrer, a very big saint who converted thousands of Jews to Christ, who raised the dead to life. He actually supported the Pope in Avignon, or again, 2020 hindsight, the Antipope in Avignon. Now, this was a terrible scandal because, of course, our Lord said at the Last Supper, he prayed to the Father that all might be one, right? Just as he and the Father are one. So the seeds were sown for the division of the one holy Roman Catholic Church. The seeds were sown for dividing the church into various churches. Well, by the early 1400s, things took an even more distressing step because the cardinals, frustrated with both of these popes, decided to hold a council, the Council of Pisa in 1409. When we get back from the break, I'm going to tell you what happened at the Council of Pisa and how a former pirate, that's right, pirate, suddenly found himself the third pope. We'll be right back.
Welcome, Daniel. You're on the line. What's on your mind, brother?
Hi, I just wanted to share a testimony about Virgin Most Powerful Radio. I had a buddy at work who, he's a lukewarm Catholic guy, and I wanted him to start listening to the Terry and Jesse show, so I kept telling him to download the app, and he kept putting me off. So one day, I grabbed his phone, and I downloaded the app for him. I went on vacation, and I kept telling him to listen to it. He would kind of put me off. I came back from vacation. He comes to my cubicle, and he says to me, "Hey, man, I've been listening to Terry and Jesse's show, and it's great." And it's made a big impact in his life. The guy, he's going to weekly adoration a couple times a week. He goes to the Mass in the morning. Mm-hmm. He's an on-fire Catholic, and he promotes the Terry and Jesse show on the Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
Daniel, what a testimony. And I want to encourage our listeners to get those cards by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org and do what Daniel's doing. Go out and spread the faith by inviting people to listen to Virgin Most Powerful. Daniel, thanks for your testimony, brother. God love you.
You're welcome.
If you shop on Amazon.com, there's an easy way to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Just visit smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center under the desired charity. Now, when you log into your Amazon account and purchase products, a portion of it will automatically go to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio at no cost to you. Thanks in advance for supporting CRC and VMPR, and may God richly bless you and your family.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE, US 1.
Now, back to the Bar of History. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Dr. Ed.
You're listening to the most powerful Catholic radio, Virgin Most Powerful Catholic Radio, Virgin Most Powerful Pray for Us. For those of you who are just joining us, today's topic is Antipopes and Apostate Catholics. You know, Mark Twain said that history does not repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. So we're trying to uncover some information from the past that will hopefully help us with our present. Listen to this quote from St. Catherine of Siena. She is talking to Pope Gregory XI, and she is warning him that he needs to get his act together and to get back to Rome. And she says, here, Pope, in September, Catherine wrote the first of her astonishing letters to the Vicar of Christ, taking as her theme the name he had assumed as Pope and the papal saint who had borne it, Gregory the Great. She says here, I will then that you be so true and good a shepherd that if you had 100,000 lives, you would be ready to give them all for the honor of God and the salvation of his creatures. O Daddy of mine, sweet Christ on earth, follow the sweet Gregory, meaning Gregory the Great. She's writing to Gregory the 11th. For all will be possible to you as to him. For he was not of other flesh than you, and that God is now who was then. We lack nothing save virtue and the hunger for the salvation of souls. Fear not, for divine aid is near. Well, ultimately, thanks be to God, Pope Gregory XI listened to St. Catherine of Siena and eventually brought the papacy back to Rome where it belonged. But unfortunately, after he died, a new pope was elected, Pope Urban VI, with whom the cardinals could not get along. And so they elected an antipope in France, in Avignon, Pope Clement VII. And this controversy between the popes of Avignon and the popes of Rome went on for decades. By 1409, there were disgusted cardinals on both sides of this issue who met in Pisa, in Italy. You're familiar with the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And at the Council of Pisa, they elected a third pope because they could not get the other two popes to resign. Or I should say, to be technically accurate here, they could not get the real pope or the anti-pope to resign. And so they elected a third pope, who was a former pirate. Yeah, that's going to work out well. I don't see any trouble with that one. And so it was just a mess. So now you've got people supporting three different men as the pope. And really, it made the Catholic Church look like a joke, essentially. Now, sometimes when the Catholic Church, when its priests and bishops and cardinals and even popes, when they can't get their act together, sometimes it takes a little nudge from the laity, whether that layperson is Catherine of Siena, or in this case, when that layperson is the most powerful ruler in Europe, the Holy Roman Emperor of Germany, a guy by the name of Emperor Sigismund. Well, Emperor Sigismund said that we need to hold a council. He sponsored a council, and that council was held in the city of Constance, which I believe is in Switzerland. And at this council, it met from, let's say, 1415 to 1419, and the anti-pope agreed to this because the anti-pope actually, which anti-pope, Dr. Mazza? There were two anti-popes by this point. Yeah, the pirate guy, he agreed to this because he actually had more Italian cardinals on his side, and he thought that he was going to win whatever showdown was going to happen at this council. But the council adopted rules whereby instead of the number of cardinals counting, it was rather counting by nationality. So the Italian cardinals got one vote. The French cardinals got one vote. And so he felt he had been tricked, and he didn't agree to what was going on. And at one point, he actually tried to escape and had to be captured. As for the other anti-pope, he refused to recognize the authority of this council, but the council denounced him as an anti-pope. And the real pope, who at this time was a man named Benedict XII, he resigned, clearing the way for the election of a legitimate Catholic pope. And the man who was elected was a Colonna family member, and he took the name of Martin V. And so finally, the church had healed this terrible schism, which had lasted for over 40 years. I mean, that's a biblical generation. So now, as I say, this was a terrible scandal for the faithful, and it led certain individuals to question the authority of the church. And the man I want to bring up is a college professor. You know, folks, I'm a former college professor, and so I must tell you, watch out for professors. They have caused more mischief over the centuries than I think we're actually worth. Let me introduce you to an Oxford professor by the name of John Wycliffe, or John Wycliffe. I've heard it both ways. Well, anyway, in 1377, he got himself involved in thoughts and debates over church and state. And he issued a document called De Civili Domino, on civil dominion, in which he said that all power and authority in a state is granted to the monarch, to the sovereign. And so he called on kings and princes to take away all the ownership of church property from the church and take it for themselves. Now, a few centuries later, a guy named Henry VIII is going to take Wycliffe up on this and actually do that. He's going to confiscate and take over church property. But at the time of Wycliffe, again, we're talking about the 1370s, this was abstract. But of course, the church recognized this as a threat. But worse still were Wycliffe's teachings on Christianity. For, among other things, he said that the scriptures should be used to refute the church. He said that lay people should have direct access to the Bible. No middlemen involved. He went so far as to say that transubstantiation was wrong. It does not occur. Now, most Catholics will know what we mean by transubstantiation. We mean that at Mass, at the consecration, when the priest says the words, "Take this, all of you, and eat it, this is my body," well, the substance of bread transmutes into the substance of Jesus Christ, of his flesh and blood. Now, the accidents of bread remain, and so it looks like bread, it tastes like bread, but Catholics believe that the underlying substance has changed. Well, Wycliffe denied this. In fact, Wycliffe eventually goes on to deny the authority of popes and bishops. You see, Wycliffe believed in an invisible church made up of the elect. We'll talk about that in a moment. He was also against clerical celibacy, and he wanted to get rid of Dominicans and Franciscans. He wanted to get rid of the mendicant friars. Now, what do I mean when he says that the church is made up of the elect? Well, we get this from another document that he published, I think in 1378, called De Ecclesia, which is on the church. And he argued that the church is made up only of the predestined. That is to say, those that are destined to go to hell one day are not really members of the church, only those that are destined to go to heaven. And he said that the Pope was not necessarily the head of the church, since he might not be among the elect. Now, needless to say, you can see what kind of chaos such a theory of the church would play out in practice if this was really the truth. You would never know who the rightful Pope was, would you? Not only that, but he opposed the veneration of the saints, except for Our Lady. He did believe in honoring Mary. He condemned indulgences and prayers for the dead. And before he died, he equated the Pope with the Antichrist. Tell me what you really think, John Wycliffe. Well, this challenge to the church's authority seeped out and into the common people. And so there are historians who believe that it was thanks to Wycliffe that in 1381, about a year after he died, a revolution, a revolt happened in England among the peasants who wanted to throw off the heavy burdens that the nobility had placed on them. And so certain historians believe that it was the followers of Wycliffe who sowed the seeds of disobedience among the peasants. That they didn't, these preachers, they're called Lollards, followers of Wycliffe, unlicensed and unlawful preachers, went around not just criticizing the accumulation of wealth and poverty among the monasteries and churchmen, but also among the nobility, the secular authorities. Now, things got to the point where they actually killed the Archbishop of Canterbury during this revolt. And so many people blamed Wycliffe for this. Now, when you have a troublemaker within the church, something has to be done about this. When we get back from the break, I'm going to tell you about the London Synod, at which many bishops, 14 canon lawyers, 22 theologians all met to discuss Wycliffe and the Lollards. We'll be right back.
If you shop on Amazon.com, there's an easy way to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Just visit smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center under the desired charity. Now, when you log into your Amazon account and purchase products, a portion of it will automatically go to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio at no cost to you. Thanks in advance for supporting CRC and VMPR, and may God richly bless you and your family.
How does the baby move in your tummy? How does the baby eat? Can the baby hear me? How did the baby get in there?
Wow, a pregnancy can sure generate a lot of questions. But what's important is that a baby is a baby, inside and out of the womb, not just after birth, but 9 months before, at conception.
That's right. Every baby is a miracle. Hello, my name is Marianne Koharski. I'm the director of Pro-Life Across America. If you know someone who is pregnant or in need of alternatives or assistance or would like to support the work of Pro-Life Across America, please visit our website at prolifeacrossamerica.org, or better yet, simply dial pound 250 on your cell phone and say the keyword pro-life. Pro-Life Across America is non-political and totally educational.
A baby's heart is beating 18 days from conception. Pro-Life Across America, the Billboard people.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE, US 1.
Now, back to the Bar of History. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Dr. Ed.
Yeah, baby. We're raising the bar of Catholic radio here at the Bar of History on Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Virgin Most Powerful, pray for us. Welcome back, folks. Today's topic is Antipopes and Catholic apostates. And we're talking about the morning star of the Protestant Reformation, a Catholic professor at a Catholic university. Watch out for those universities. Watch out for those professors. Got to tell you. Takes one to know one. All right. He was teaching that the church is not the Pope and the bishops. The church is the elect, those that are predestined by God to go to heaven. He also said that transubstantiation does not happen at Mass. Well, let me read to you from the findings of the Synod of London, which met after the Peasants' Revolt. Now, Wycliffe denied any involvement in the Peasants' Revolt, but these bishops and canon lawyers and theologians that met at the Synod of London found that there were at least 10 heretical positions that this Oxford Don was teaching. That there's no transubstantiation at Mass, that a bishop or a priest in mortal sin may not ordain or consecrate or baptize validly, that oral confession of sins is unnecessary, that the gospel does not show that Christ ordained the Mass. He was against Scripture. He said it was against Scripture for the clergy to own property, and thus we saw in his earlier work, right, on the dominion of the civil authorities, he said that it's the state that should confiscate and take over all the church property. And he also said that a sinful pope has no authority. Now, this is heresy, obviously. And under normal circumstances, a trial would have taken place. He would have been found guilty, and he would have been handed over to the temporal authorities, to the state, to be executed. Because in those days, it was the death penalty for heresy. But Wycliffe had friends in high places, in the circle of the king and at the court. And so political pressure was put on the Archbishop of Canterbury. And so the synod demanded only his removal from Oxford and not an actual trial for heresy. Also, the fact that there was the schism in Rome and in Avignon contributed to an atmosphere where Wycliffe could kind of get away with murder, so to speak. The fact of the matter is he was never removed from Oxford. And for decades afterwards, his followers, known as the Lollards, they used to meet together to read the Bible in English. Because Wycliffe had said that Scripture was the only authoritative, well, let's put it this way, it's the most authoritative guide to the truth about God. And so he became involved in efforts to translate the Bible into English. Now, there's nothing wrong with people reading the Bible in English. The problem with Wycliffe and the Lollards is that their translation was heretical. They were promoting heretical ideas along with translating the Bible into English. And also, the church said you have to have the authority of a bishop. You have to have the authority of the Pope. You have to have authority before you can translate the scriptures into the language of the common people. And these were, well, Wycliffe and his followers had unauthorized versions of the scriptures. Well, our friend here, Wycliffe, died of a stroke on December 28th of the year 1384, and he was posthumously condemned at the Council of Constance in 1415 as a heretic. His body was exhumed, burned, and his ashes were scattered. But quite frankly, it was too late. Wycliffe and his ideas had already spread from Oxford and England to the wider world. And this brings us to another apostate Catholic, another John, or I should say Jan, a Czech national by the name of Jan Hus. He was he was from a place called Bohemia, but we would know it better today as the Czech Republic, where he was a student at the University of Prague in 1395. Now, Hus had read and began to promote Wycliffe's writing among the Czech people. And Hus became a Catholic priest, and he was accused by his fellow priests on many charges, and ultimately his local bishop excommunicated him for disobedience. But Jan Hus continued to preach in defiance of the excommunication order against him. Now, Hus came to symbolize, if you go to the Czech Republic today, if you go to the capital of Prague, they've got a big statue of the guy. He's looked up as this hero, as this martyr of the Czech people. Let's talk a little bit more about why this is the case. Hus was the official chaplain of what's known as the Bethlehem Chapel in the city of Prague. Now, this was a special chapel set aside for sermons in the language of the common people. This is something he has in common with, forgive the pun, with John Wycliffe, this insistence on the language of the common people. And sometimes there were as many as 3,000 people who came to listen to his sermons. And he translated the scriptures into the Czech language. Now, it wasn't simply that he explained the Bible to them. He used his pulpit to criticize the Pope. Well, the question is which Pope, because there were three of them. I think he was critical of all three of them. But the one who had authority over him was the Antipope that was the pirate. John the 23rd was his name, the Pope of Pisa. And Jan Hus was also upset because the lay people at his time were not allowed to receive the Eucharist in the chalice. They were only allowed to receive the Eucharist under the appearance of bread. And this was the case all over the Catholic Church until after the Second Vatican Council, which is a subject for another day. So he and his reformers wanted to achieve a level of equality with the priests. He said that lay people should receive the chalice because lay people are just as worthy as priests. Well, again, talk like this, in addition to his criticisms of indulgences, his promotion of the ideas of John Wycliffe, led him not only to be excommunicated by his local bishop, but to receive excommunication from this antipope, John the 23rd. Now, as we spoke before, the Council of Constance was meeting at this time by Emperor Sigismund. Now, Emperor Sigismund's brother, I think his name was Charles, was the king of Bohemia. And so Hus wanted to get in on the Council of Constance. he thought this might be his opportunity to defend himself against what he believed were false charges of heresy and obstinacy. And so he obtained from he obtained from Emperor Sigismund what's called a safe conduct pass. In other words, he had a pass, and it was from the emperor, and it meant that he could not be arrested or molested. He had to be allowed to attend the council peaceably. Unfortunately for Hus, his pass from the emperor did not work. Once he got to the council, he was arrested as a heretic, and he was thrown in prison. Now, he was put on trial. Jan Hus, Father Hus, by the way, his name means goose in the Czech language. So the goose was put on trial for heresy, for his obstinacy, his disobedience. And he tried to say in his own defense that he never said half the stuff that they said he said, and people were misinterpreting him, is essentially the stance that he took. Now, there was a cardinal there, Cardinal Zabarella, who asked him to recant, that is, to take back, to reject any condemned propositions, condemned by the church, that he admitted were in his writings, and which in his testimony he had not denied were in his writings. Cardinal asked him to recant. And he also suggested to Hus that for statements that he denied having said, it would be sufficient if he were to swear that he did not hold these positions and to promise that he would not believe concerning them, that he would only believe concerning these propositions whatever the church teaches about these propositions. Now, this is a very reasonable offer for a man who has his life on the line. But Hus was a stubborn goose, and he rejected Cardinal Zabarella's offer. And so he was brought before the full council of Constance, and the next day they declared him a contumacious heretic, a follower of John Wycliffe. He was turned over to the temporal authorities. And when we get back from the break, we're going to find out how Jan Hus met his final end as a condemned heretic.
Logan, what has Virgin Most Powerful Radio done for you?
Well, Virgin Most Powerful Radio, I got to say, I've been a listener for about a year now, and it's really helped me grow closer to my faith and the fact that I'm listening and I'm getting unsugar-coated, clear, charity with clarity Catholicism. And it has really helped me even, grow so much deeper in my faith as a young man and discern the priesthood and have a love for Jesus Christ. And this is so seen on the Terry and Jesse show on Virgin Most Powerful, the unsugar-coated, clear truth of our Catholic faith that is so lacking today. It's almost like the Terry and Jesse show. It's the orange juice Catholicism. It's filling things up. I just need to give them a shout out, my praise. I'm just so appreciative. It's just really helped me, and I know people want to hear this. It inspires me to want to speak it, and it inspires me to even go as far as discerning the priesthood to think I should speak this. We need to stand up for our beautiful faith. This is this unsugar-coated beauty, and this is just what I've seen on the Terry and Jesse show. I encourage so many listeners to start donating and support this cause. It has just really impacted my life, and all I just want to give is some praise to it.
Hebrews 11:3 says, "By faith we come to understand." According to St. Augustine, understanding is the reward of faith. Therefore, seek not to understand that you may believe, but believe that you may understand. May God grant us a strong living faith in Him and His divine plan of salvation, and help us to believe so that we may understand.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE, US 1.
Now, back to the Bar of History. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Dr. Ed.
The bar is open. Yeah, we're one of the few bars that are open these days. And remember, this is the bar where we encourage you to think responsibly. We're talking today about Antipopes and Catholic apostates. Jan Hus, a Catholic priest from Prague in the modern-day Czech Republic, was upset with the hierarchy. And he was especially upset that the faithful received communion only under the appearance of bread and not also under the appearance of wine. Now, it's interesting that we should be studying this because it was just announced. Let me see if I've got my source on this handy here. It's just been released by the Bergoglian papacy that communion on the tongue can be denied to the faithful. Here is I'm looking at a document from the Congregation for the Cult of Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments. And apparently, Pope Bergoglio is specifically intervened so that communion on the tongue can be denied to people by their local bishop because of the pandemic. It says that, well, I'll direct you to this later because I don't want to take away from the subject. What I want to raise at this moment is you can kind of see where the faithful in Prague might feel that they had a leg to stand on here, being dictated to about how they can receive Holy Communion. In fact, I should point out to you that after Hus was executed, yes, when we went to break, I had said that he was found guilty, he was handed over to the authorities, and he was killed. He was actually burned at the stake. So you might say that his goose was cooked, to use a bad joke there. I just want to read, before I go back to this issue of Holy Communion, I want to read to you from a Professor Thomas Fudge, who wrote a book, The Trial of Jan Hus. Now, Fudge is a Protestant, but he's an excellent scholar, and he comes to the conclusion, he says, I believe the evidence shows conclusively that Jan Hus was a heretic. And he explains that in those days, to be disobedient to lawful authority was in itself part of being a heretic. And so he explains how, well, I'll read from Professor Fudge. I am also convinced that a careful investigation of canon law and medieval criminal procedure demonstrates that despite identifiable irregularities, the trial was legal. Even some of the most strident critics of the trial concede that the process conformed to current court practices. So, perhaps on a future Bar of History, we can go into more detail about the trial of Jan Hus. but because many people have wanted to rehabilitate him. Even Pope John Paul II spoke about him in, shall we say, the most charitable of terms. It is hard to get away from the fact that he was a follower of John Wycliffe and therefore was an obstinate heretic. But in terms of his demand that the faithful be able to receive the chalice as well as the wafer, his followers, after he was put to death, they rose up in rebellion, and there was actually open warfare in what used to be Czechoslovakia or Bohemia, what is today the Czech Republic, for 20 years. There was actually a papal crusade against the Hussites. And there were actually soldiers on both sides of this fighting each other, and people getting killed by the thousands, rotting corpses on the battlefield over this issue about Holy Communion in particular. In fact, it reached the point where the papal forces, since they could not defeat the Hussites militarily, they actually negotiated with the moderate Hussites and granted their request, so that in the 15th and 16th centuries, only the people in the Czech Republic were allowed, or I should say only the people in Bohemia were allowed to have communion under both kinds, under both species. The lay people received the Eucharist under the appearance of bread, and they received it under the appearance of wine. So in a sense, they won their grievance. Now, again, it's a separate topic for another day to talk about all the experiments that have happened since Vatican II. Before we finish today, I want to briefly bring up not an apostate Catholic and not an anti-pope, but a Catholic saint who lived at the same time as all of this was going on, and that is Saint Joan of Arc. I'm sure you have heard of this Catholic saint. She's recognized even by secular people as a great hero of history. Jeanne, as you would say her name in French, was born in 1412 during the height of the 100 Years' War between England and France, at a time when the English controlled most of northern France, including Paris. She was a farm girl, and she was a teenager when she started having voices speak to her. Now, she was not mentally ill. This was a genuine manifestation of divine providence. She was the youngest of 5 children. She lived in Domremy, France. But when she was 12, she heard a voice from God, as well as St. Michael the Archangel, St. Catherine, and St. Margaret. And her voices told her she must deliver her country from the invading English. I want you to think about this for a moment. Maybe some of you have teenage daughters at home. What would you say if your teenage daughter came to you and said, Dad, the voices in my head are telling me that I need to go to the Middle East, and I'm going to single-handedly kick out ISIS or Al-Qaeda from Iraq? Is that going to go over very well? I don't think that's going to go over well. In the case of Jeanne, she left home at 16 to answer her calling. This is an uneducated farm girl here. In May of 1428, she went to see Sir Robert de Baudricourt and asked to be sent to the king. Now, the king of France at the time was not even recognized as the king. He was the heir to the throne. He was in French, we call it the Dauphin. And because the English occupied Paris and many northern cities of France, a lot of people withheld their allegiance from this heir to the throne. Now, in 1429, Jeanne disclosed a vision that the French would suffer a major defeat outside the city of Orleans. Now, this guy Baudricourt finally led her to Charles VII, the Dauphin, and the Dauphin sent her to be examined by the doctors of the church to see whether her visions were authentic or not, right? She could be a heretic, she could be a witch, she could be mentally ill, or any number of things. Now, these professors, these doctors, examined her thoroughly, and guess what? They found that this teenage girl from the backcountry was authentically inspired by God. At least that's how they saw it. So, after being examined against all odds, the Dauphin officially gave Jeanne command of the armies of France. Now, of course, there were generals there to actually do the practical work of the matter, but Jeanne, at the age of 17, was there in battle armor with a banner leading the troops. In April of 1429, she led the French against the English at the Battle of Orleans, and she actually broke the siege of Orleans in only 3 days of fighting. This was a major, major victory. Now, Jeanne had predicted that she would be wounded, and she was. She was wounded by an arrow above her breast during the attack, and her prediction happened 15 days before the event and is documented. As I remember, she actually pulled the arrow out of her chest with her own hands, which is quite the feat for, again, not some macho warrior, battle-hardened, grizzlied old warrior, but again, a farm girl. Jeanne was rewarded by Charles with a coat of arms, and Charles himself drew the design for her coat of arms. Now, the problem is that having obtained the city of Orleans, the Dauphin, who actually was crowned in Reims Cathedral as King Charles VII, having obtained the crown, he sort of abandoned Joan, who eventually fell into English hands and was put on trial and unfortunately was burned at the stake. But her name was cleared in later years, and we know her as Saint Joan of Arc. Oh, folks, I'm so sorry time ran out for today, but remember, let nothing frighten you, let nothing disturb you. All things are passing. Remember, God alone never changes, and if you have God, you lack absolutely nothing. Please pray for me. I will pray for you. And please tune in again next week, folks, because you and me, we got history.